Good. Okay. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we're back live with Brain Food from the Heartland, Louis Be Free radio show. I have Dovid Margolin on with me. Dovid, good morning to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Louis. Good morning.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would.
Well, I'm a journalist based in Brooklyn. I'm a senior editor at Chabad.org, and I have a long-standing interest in kind of Soviet Jewry and the history of Soviet Jewry, and as well as the current story. I spent a lot of time in Ukraine as a young man in my early 20s. I spent a year in Kharkov, Ukraine, actually. So, 8 years ago, when the first real rumblings of the war that we're seeing today began in East Ukraine, in Lugansk, in the Donetsk regions, it was something that I naturally kind of headed for, just to cover that story. And I've been covering it more or less consistently for the last 8 years. And obviously more, in the last 40 days since this war, it's been something that I've been constantly involved with and speaking to people there and just writing about the story of real people.
So, and where does that come from in you, that wanting to write the story about real people? What do you think?
Well, the writing I think that when you speak in the abstract, and when we're talking about kind of the headlines that we see, and everything is so, we have Twitter, we have Facebook, whatever, we have all these different social media platforms, and we're seeing what's going on, and it's horrific, and then you can kind of move on. But then when you speak to a real person who, just like you and me, and they were living calmly, and they were going, if they were Jewish, they were going to synagogue, their child was going to a play group or a preschool or school, and then all of a sudden everything kind of just flips over on its head, and they're forced to run. And then especially for me, having been in these places and knowing that, Ukraine isn't really not all that far away. It's a plane ride away, but it's a real world, it's real people, it's real lives. And then seeing how all that kind of the interplay, and then just telling that story so that people should at least be able to empathize, and then think, what can I do to alleviate the situation, to help in some small way.
You think of, and again, that, if you don't mind if I push on this a little bit, Dovid, that where do you think that comes from in you, that you want to bring those stories forward in the hopes that people will do what they can in whatever way?
So,
empathy. It sounds like empathy. I'm sorry. I asked you a question. I interrupted you. It sounds like a lot of empathy.
Well, I'll tell you, I work I work for Chabad.org, and I'm a Chabad Lubavitch Chassid, and the Rebbe of Chabad Lubavitch, Rabbi Menachem M. Schneerson, and we can speak about him more at length soon, but he was actually born in Ukraine 120 years ago. So speak about how things kind of coincide so deeply. So the Rebbe spoke about every single individual's, and that's Jew and non-Jew, every single person's ability to create a better world around them, right? So each person has a very unique gift to them, and they have that ability to, they have a mission in life, and this is God put us on this earth to do something. So, the first Jewish prayer, the first prayer that a Jew says every single morning is Moda Ani Lefanecha, which is, thank you, God, for returning my soul and putting your trust in me. And that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the day, that I'm not just kind of going around through life, just kind of floating along. I have a mission. And that mission is to change the world around me in the ways that I can, with my unique abilities, with my, with the people that I can influence in my surroundings, and really change the world in that way. So for me, I feel that I have that ability to be able to tell these stories, and I know these people, and so I very much see my writing and telling these stories from that place. Like, this is something that I can do, and there's other people that can do it, certainly, but I feel that I have a unique voice and a unique ability to do that, and every single person has a unique, and I'm sure you Louis, you see this as well, that you have that ability to be able to speak to people, to bring about, to help them understand issues, to kind of chew through them yourself, and then relay that on to so many people. And that's kind of that's really where I come from in terms of this whole story. And really, I try to do that in all my work and obviously in my own personal life. But it's a daily grind.
Sure, and a daily obligation. You feel obviously a daily obligation for you.
Sure, but not a scary obligation. I think that's
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's something which is important, I think, for everybody. It's a Jewish prayer, Modani, but I believe that every single person, when we wake up in the morning, you thank God for returning your soul to you and placing you on your path. Certainly, it's an obligation, and you have a responsibility to fulfill that unique path. But that gives you purpose in everything that you do. So you're not just wasting away. You have something to accomplish. So yeah, it's an obligation, certainly, but I think that it's a positive one. It's a
Sure.
This is something that gives you the reason to go about what you do. Yeah. Purpose, exactly.
When you think about some of the things with Ukraine and the history, tell us a little bit more, if you would, about what you know. I was going to say what you've learned, what you know.
So I know people don't love hearing, a huge amount of history, but I think that one very
it's important though. Sorry.
It is, yeah. And the Jewish story in Ukraine is hundreds of years old, and there was something the Empress Catherine Catherine the Great of Russia, when she got these lands during the second partition of Poland. So she got this vast swath of land, much of which is Ukraine today, and that became part of her empire. And that's where the Jews were. And she created something called the Pale of Settlement. And within that Pale of Settlement was where Jews were allowed to live, and they were not allowed to live beyond that. So, for a Jew to live before the 1917 revolution, for a Jew to live in Moscow or in St. Petersburg, that was, you needed a special permit. So the vast majority of Jews lived within what is today Ukraine. And then there's also, of course, a very deep history in Belarus. And the Jewish people, therefore, this is really the heartland of the Jewish people in that region of the world. And all of us, have ancestors. Well, all of us Ashkenazi Jews have ancestors. We came over to America or to the West, various countries in the West from more or less the same region. And Ukraine, until the 20s, as late as the 20s, 50% of the Soviet Union's Jews were living in Ukraine, and what is today Ukraine. So there's a very, very deep history. At the same time, it's a very painful history. So there were pogroms, there were and there's various reasons. One of the national heroes of Ukraine is a man named Bogdan Khmelnytsky. They don't, today in modern Ukraine, I don't think when they think of him, they think about his anti-Jewish pogroms, but that in Jewish history for hundreds of years, that's what he was known for, as somebody who terrorized Jews. Now, at the same time, there's always light, right? So in the Ukraine context, you have this, actually only about 40, 50 years after these devastating pogroms of Bogdan Khmelnytsky, this figure was born, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, and he became known as the Baal Shem Tov. He was a mystic, and he was the founder of the Hasidic movement, which really revolutionized Jewish life in all ways. It brought this heart and soul into Judaism. It revived the belief in kind of the simple words of prayer of a simple Jew. It's a simple person who just can't study very much, isn't wealthy, and how much God appreciates his efforts. So it's a mixed history, and all of that leads up through the years. There's kind of these ups and downs, and this was a flowering Jewish community that really suffered very, very much as well. And that really, you have the dawn of the Soviet Union in 1917, and then of course the Holocaust. And the Holocaust is a very, very It's a difficult subject, I think, for people, for Ukrainians to discuss, but it's a real issue. That doesn't mean, I just want to say that, 1.5 million Jews were murdered in the lands of what is today Ukraine, and that was obviously led by the Nazis, but there were also local collaborators.
For me,
Yeah.
1.5 million. I just, the numbers are just
Yeah,
horrific.
it is horrific.
That. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
And people tend to forget about it because you have, Auschwitz and the death camps are so well documented, and they're horrific as well. But there is this whole, there's 1.5 million Jews who were murdered in ditches outside of cities. There's Babi Yar is the most famous, the one in Kiev. I spent a year in Kharkov. There's Derbitsky Yar outside of Kharkov, and these ravines, and there are Jews who were murdered there. So we have to remember that, and the fact that this was done, of course, by the Nazis, but also local collaborators. Now, that's not to say that it's only in Ukraine, where any student of history will tell you that in Lithuania and Latvia and in all these, in different countries, there were many local collaborators. So that's not to say that, at least it's not my belief, that Ukraine was somehow more complicit than their other collaborators in other nations. But that is definitely a part of the history. At the same time, that's not, the Ukraine that we're speaking of today, which is the one that's really, standing up very heroically and battling for itself. I don't think is this is a country that's evolved and has changed and has become, from the Jewish context, has become a very, very hospitable place for its Jewish community. There's debate over the numbers, but I would put the number of Jews at, prior to this war, about 350,000 Jews. Could be a little bit less, but it's a very, very large Jewish community and spread out throughout the entire country. And they've really, since 1990, since 1991, since the fall of communism, when Ukraine became an independent country, it's really evolved this community. And it's not just that they're surviving, it's that they're thriving. And I'll tell you, Dnipro has been in the news recently. All these different cities that people never heard of are now suddenly in the news. So Dnipro was known as Yekaterinoslav before the revolution. It became Dnepropetrovsk during the Soviet era, and just now, in a few years ago, 2016, maybe, it became known as Dnipro. Now, Dnipro is a small city, relatively small city, and it's maybe the fourth largest in Ukraine, third largest, and it is home to this magnificent menorah center. It's 20 stories, 7 towers. You walk in there and you don't have to walk out for a week, right? There's a kosher restaurant, there's a museum, there's a synagogue, there's a hotel. I mean, it's really, really beautiful. And that was before the war. And now it's become a center for refugees, and there's aid, and it's what they've done there is amazing. But just to point out how hospitable it's become. Like the first time that I was coming back to Dnipro after they had built this menorah center, I wanted to see the menorah center, right? I had seen pictures of it and I wanted to see it. And we're coming over this bridge into Dnipro, and I pointed to my driver. I'm like, oh my God, that's it. Like I can see it changed the skyline, right? So this was a young Chabad rabbi Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky came to Dnipro, to Dnepropetrovsk back then in 1990, and over the years built a team of rabbis, young Chabad rabbis, and their wives came and built the center, and more. I mean, they have an old age home, they have childcare facilities. I mean, it's not just this building even. So just to point out how evolved it's, how thriving it was until just 40 days ago.
Just until 40 days ago. And again, I'm freaked out about what's going on. And it's interesting, Dovid Margolin, that when I think about some of the people say, well, I can't watch. I get it. I understand, because it starts to seep into you, and you feel helpless. You feel like you can't, I get that, but you also can't turn away.
That's right. That's
And
right.
that's what you've done in the piece in the Wall Street Journal, which was last Thursday, and I've got that linked up. Tell us a little bit about that.
So that piece is it's really, I'm trying to look at the history of in a very brief amount of space. Of course, I tend to write much longer pieces, and it's kind of going back to what there's. So I mentioned the Baal Shem Tov. It's kind of, history is a battleground. That this we can see very clearly between Ukraine, between Russia, and it's been one for certainly for the last decade. It's a real battleground, and kind of what all these different events mean. And you see that in rhetoric coming from Moscow, you see that in rhetoric coming from Kiev, and it's important. But what I tried to point out was that it actually has something far beyond just in terms of rhetoric. It's not just like a backdrop for political maneuvering or geopolitical maneuvering. It's something which informs today. So there, I mentioned the birth there of the Baal Shem Tov in 1698, and this creation of the Hasidic movement, which really blossomed and spread like wildfire throughout the whole Eastern Europe, and really affects Jewish life today in all ways. And then, of course, there's the birth 120 years ago of the Rebbe. And kind of what does that mean? So the Rebbe was born in Nikolaev. It's called Mykolaiv in Ukrainian. He was born there in Nikolaev in the anniversary. It's the 11th of Nisan. It's approaching, actually. April 12th is going to be on the secular calendar. It's going to be corresponding to April 12th of this year. So that's 120 years ago in a Ukraine that was kind of the beginnings of the revolution were already taking place. And yet it's still the Tsarist regime. So you have pogroms there. I mentioned a story there about how in 1905 was a year of revolution in the Russian Empire, and also a year of pogroms and devastating ones. So the Rebbe was a 3-year-old boy at the time. His mother took him into a basement of a pharmacy, into the cellar of a pharmacy, together with other women during a pogrom. So there's people breaking windows out in the street, just looting and obviously out to kill. And they go into the basement, and the other children are crying, and risking that people are going to find them in this basement. And I know, the story doesn't in the article. I wasn't able to get into all the details, but the pharmacist was scared. A non-Jewish pharmacist was scared of what would be, and the Rebbe, his mother, wrote this many years later. His mother wrote, she sees her 3-year-old son walking around to each child and soothing them and calming them, and one way to this child, another way to this one. And she says that this non-Jewish pharmacist, who had taken a great risk in hiding these Jews in the basement, was amazed, was watching with amazement how this little boy. So, and I think that's it's a story, but it really kind of tells this broader picture, this broader story of what's become of what happened in Ukraine. So the Rebbe grew up in Nikolaev, and then in what is today Dnipro in Yekaterinostov. That's where his father became the chief rabbi, and his father was a very unique figure, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Schneerson. He, people tend to sometimes we look, I think, mistakenly, but religious Jews or Orthodox Jews, they're kind of a closed environment, and Rabbi Levi Yitzchak was somebody who really broke that mold very early on, right? I would say that I don't think I'm like that today, but it's because of the example of people like Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, where he was a chief rabbi who was able to relate to all sorts of people within his community, and it was a very large Jewish community. And there were secular individuals, there were Yiddishists, and many of the leading Zionists came from there, and they weren't necessarily religious. And he was a very, very inclusive chief rabbi. And then came the Soviet era, and that was a very difficult era. So if there were pogroms during the Tsarist era, so here there's this all-out war on Jewish life and practice under the Soviet regime. And cut me off, Louis, if I'm going too detailed.
No, please. No, Dovid, please.
So
no, it's the history. It's important.
So, well, yeah, I believe so, but not everybody appreciates when I get into.
people have the option of, I dare say, listening or not. And I
Right.
find it's very interesting and very informative and educational and important. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So the Soviet government was persecuted through the 20s, is persecuting religion. And it's not only the Jewish religion,
Sure.
it's Christianity, it's Islam, it's all religions, but there is a special vengeance for the Jews. And that's really, I didn't mention this, but my parents, I'm a first generation American. My parents came from the Soviet Union in 1985. And they grew up without, with same, maybe some slight connections to the, they knew that they were Jews, of course. There were certain things perhaps that they observed, or at least they knew of, but overall, very, very uneducated in the Jewish perspective until they started learning about it in the 80s, actually in the Soviet Union and then in America. But that really stems from the 20s. That's when it really began, when there was, what would you do when you're being forced to choose between, your life and your job, and then at some point in time your life and there were people who withstood, and Rabbi Levi Yitzchak was one of these people who withstood that. And in 1939 he was arrested, and it's interesting because the reason why he was arrested, I mean, at least this was the kind of, let's say, the straw that broke the camel's back, was matzah. Before Passover, and he went head to head with the Soviet government. They wanted to, the Jews buy matzah, and this goes back for, in the last century. Matzah is important, and even in the Soviet era, matzah was something which is it's inexplicable. You can't explain it. It's just the soul is reaching out and wants matzah. And in the Soviet era, during the darkest time, 1939 is a very, very dark time, and the Soviet government knew that, and they can't suppress it. So they're like, let's make money on it at least. So government bakeries would bake matzah, and he insisted that the matzah that baked in his bakeries under his supervision was authentically kosher, and he won. Ultimately, before that Passover, he was arrested and he was tortured, and he was exiled to Kazakhstan, where he passed away in 1944. And when we speak about what's happening today, is this long arc of history. Today in Dnipro, in Yekaterinoslav, the same exact city, there is a Shmura Matzah bakery. It's about 15 years old, and they're baking matzah. And even now, as this war goes on, they're baking matzah, and it is, you can buy it. I can buy it here down the block, and a block away from where I'm sitting right now. It's all over the United States, and it's Ukrainian matzah. Everyone knows Ukrainian shmur matzah. So you can just see kind of that arc of history. How there is a reason to be optimistic.
There is, and I'm glad you said that. There is, I've got to ask you, since you said that about matzah, did you ever think you'd see gluten-free matzah? When I saw gluten-free, it's like, wow, right?
It's a big deal. Listen, yeah, I see. It's a little pricey, but yeah. There's oats. I'm not oats, totally familiar with.
I'm not, but I have seen it, and that's why. You're good for a couple more minutes with me?
Absolutely.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, top of the hour, listening to Louis B. Free Radio Show, Brain Food from the Heartland, copyright B. Free Radio Limited 2022, produced by the lovely Ms. Bunny Face in cooperation with White Rabbit Production, Chabad.org. We've got the links up also to Dovid Margolin's piece, Chabad, Ukraine's mission, and also all the other articles that we've got at, I'm sorry, at Muck Rack. We've got that link up. Sorry, Dovid. I started thinking matzah. Let me ask you this. How do you, and I hope you're okay with this question, how will Passover, I should ask, be different for you this year with what's going on in Ukraine?
That's an interesting question. It'll certainly be different for the Jews of Ukraine.
Sure, sure. But for you?
So for me, it will be different. I spent, I told you, a very formative year in Ukraine as a young rabbinical student, and I was in Kharkov. And our job was, or our role was, to be a part of the community, to study on our own and with members of with people, just Jews in the community in Kharkov. Kharkov is Ukraine's second largest city, and just seeing image. We're speaking about images. I see the images of the center of the city or even suburbs and how they've been decimated completely. And my head sparks like, oh, I remember that place from, Lag BaOmer, or I remember Hanukkah time visiting, there's a neighborhood, Alexeyevka, and I remember visiting somebody in their home in Alexeyevka and bring them a menorah. So all these different places kind of bring up these memories. And I think Passover does the same thing for me. I spent that Passover, I was a counselor in a Passover camp. So they have we have summer camp for children, and sometimes you have a winter camp if the opportunity arises. And in Ukraine, there was, and hopefully there will be again, a Passover camps. And children, we had about 150 campers, campgrounds right near Dnipro, and we did the whole Passover there. So we had regular camp, regular camp activities, and we also had the holiday. And it was something which was very, I did the Seder then. I'm leading the Seder as I was 20 years old. I'm leading it as the head of the household, with a group of 10 campers. So it was a very, very special experience. It's one of the things that in Chabad is very common, is when you get a little bit older, 17, 18 years old, you're already out in the world trying to, running a Seder in some far off place. So that's what I did that year. I was in, so certainly I'll be thinking about that this year, where those children are. They're not children anymore. They're in their 20s. I think they're about 10 years old then. So maybe they're probably in their mid to high 20s. So thinking about where they are, once in a while, I think about even whether they're alive. That as far as I know, they are. I haven't heard anything, but it's something that crosses my mind. And I think that doing something, and Louis, I actually every year I missed out on COVID, because of, for obvious reasons, but I run a Seder. I'm with my in-laws, and I run a Seder, for a Passover Seder, for in a home for developmentally disabled individuals.
Wow.
It's I drive there right before the holiday. Me and my brother-in-law, actually, we drive there right before the holiday, and it's a very it's very condensed, because they're we're not able to go for very long. And then, but we do, we say the story of the Haggadah of the Jews coming out of Egypt, and we eat the matzah and the maror and drink grape juice. And then we walk back. It's a 20-minute walk to where I usually spend the Passover with my in-laws. And it's obviously it's very, very special. But this year, doing that for me personally, doing that kind of with people, with the Jews of Ukraine in mind, is certainly going to be special. Just it's something that I'm doing. I would have been doing it anyway, but it's definitely,
but it's different this year. I think that's wonderful that you do that with the people at the center, with my
children. My two boys come with me as well.
Wonderful experience.
Yes, absolutely, wonderful and important.
Dovid, your in-laws must be very, very pleased with their. I hope you're okay with this. No filter between my brain and my mouth, as my wife always said. I always have to say it out loud. My greatest assets, my greatest liability. No filter between the brain and my mouth. But they must be very, very delighted with their daughter's choice for a husband.
Well, I don't know. I'm going to leave it to them. I hope so. I try to do that.
I'd like to connect with you. You tell them this wacky talk show host said that you must be very pleased. I'm sure
I'll cut out wacky, but yeah, I'll definitely tell them.
Tell them an old hippie said it. I appreciate you being on. I hope we can connect. I'm really glad that Candy connected us, and it's very powerful to hear that again, that the Wall Street Journal piece and your other pieces up also are really, really interesting and really educational for people, because again, we hear you, it means different things, obviously, to different people, but you really educate and make it personal with what you talk about, and give us some of that history. Go ahead.
And if I may, I don't want to plug anything, but
Plug,
we have a
please plug.
we have a link on Chabad.org. It's Chabad.org/Ukraine. And I would say that there is that option, of course, to give charity towards what is obviously a very, very good cause. And any amount is important. But I think also we have a link there. On that page is also a way to say a prayer. And just to think about maybe a good deed that you could do on the for the people of Ukraine's behalf, and I want to say, donating money is very, very important. It's a mitzvah. It's something
for those that can, right?
100%. But then there are also other things that are important, and saying a prayer, doing a good deed. That is something which is very, very important and is sorely needed right now in this world. So, when during any time when we see darkness, it's always, but whenever we see darkness, kind of in this particular way, there's always a corresponding amount of light and then some that we can and shouldn't have the good obligation to add to this world. So that means, doing a favor for somebody, driving an elderly, relative or somebody that needs help. There's so many different things that people can do. For the Jewish people, Passover is coming up, so make sure to get some matzah and sit down and eat it on the night of Passover. But there are so many things that we can and should do, and I think that so Chabad.org/Ukraine is one way to do it. But there are so many things, and I just want, when we're hearing about these stories, when we're seeing these pictures, it should move us to do something additional. So that's what I wanted to add.
And I also love that at Chabad.org, request from Ukraine rabbis, fill an extra chair at your Seder for a Jew in Ukraine. It's beautiful. A lot of information, and we've got that. I'm going to make that also another link directly to the charitable and the information on Ukraine. I hope we can do this again.
Absolutely, Louis. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dovid. Again, I'm glad that we've connected, and you've really educated me. I'm again reading that article and reading some of the other ones that you've got, educated, and it again gives it an entirely different, I don't want to say perspective, understanding. Again, we see very broadly and see the hell and horror that's going on. There's
I appreciate that.
things that you've done beautifully. So let's do this again. And I hope you have a good Passover. Don't forget to tell
you as well
what I said. Thank you.
I'm going to. Thank you so much.
How wonderful, ladies and gentlemen. Wonderful. Just to connect with him. Dovid Margolin on the Louis B. Free radio show, Brain Food from the Heartland. I was just